I didn't even want to go on the trip. It was supposed to be a chill weekend at my best friend Connor's lake house. Just a bunch of guys, beers, maybe some fishing if we felt ambitious. I almost said no. Work had been hell all week. I was tired, and the thought of being trapped in a cabin with a group of straight dudes cracking the same 3 jokes about bromance and no homo didn't exactly excite me. But Connor insisted. He practically begged. And then he mentioned his younger brother Ethan was going to be there too. That got my attention. I hadn't seen Ethan in years. Not since he was in high school. Back then, he was just Connor's skinny, awkward little brother. Always holed up in his room with headphones on and that long emo haircut that made him look perpetually annoyed. I didn't think much of it at the time, but Connor said he'd grown up a lot. "Dude's taller than me now," he'd said with a laugh. "He works out like crazy. Kinda hot, not gonna lie. You might not even recognize him." That made me curious. And if I'm being honest, a little hopeful in a way I tried not to examine too closely. We arrived late Friday afternoon. The lake house was exactly as I remembered. 2 stories. Wraparound porch, creaky wooden dock that jutted out into the water like a scene from a postcard. Connor's parents weren't there, which meant no rules and plenty of booze. I tossed my duffel inside, already sweating through my t-shirt, when Connor yelled from the back of the house, "Yo, Ethan, he's here!" A beat later, someone rounded the corner, and I swear my brain short-circuited. It wasn't the awkward kid I remembered. Ethan had filled out in all the right ways. Broad shoulders under a white tank top, tan skin, short cropped hair that made his eyes look even sharper. He had a quiet, intense energy, the kind that made you want to watch him without realizing you were staring. And when his eyes locked on mine, something about the way he smiled, slow, deliberate, sent a jolt straight to my chest. "Hey," he said, voice deeper than I expected. "Didn't know you were coming." I blinked. Yeah, Connor kinda roped me into it last minute. He nodded, then turned away to grab a case of drinks from the cooler like it was nothing. But I couldn't stop watching him. The rest of the guys arrived over the next hour, Connor's college buddies, loud and familiar in that way where you don't even need to know their names to know exactly what kind of guys they are. I played along, drank a beer, laughed at the right times, but every time Ethan walked by, my eyes followed, and I could swear he noticed. Later that night, after the bonfire had burned down and everyone else crashed, I found myself alone in the kitchen, nursing the last of my beer and scrolling mindlessly through my phone. I didn't hear him come in until he was already behind me. "You always this quiet?" Ethan asked, his voice low, amused. I turned. He was standing close, closer than he needed to be. "Only when I'm surrounded by straight boys trying to outburp each other," I replied with a half smile. He chuckled, leaning against the counter. "Yeah, they're a lot." There was a pause, the kind that feels loaded even though no one's saying anything. "You remember me?" he asked suddenly. I looked at him, really looked. The muscles in his arms, the curve of his mouth when he smirked, the flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Not like this," I said. He didn't smile, but something shifted in his expression. "Same," he said quietly. And just like that, the weekend changed. I didn't sleep much that night. After Ethan said same, he didn't elaborate. He just pushed off the counter, gave me a casual night, and walked back toward the bunk room like nothing had happened. But something had happened. That little exchange, so simple on the surface, kept echoing in my head like a skipped record. I lay on the couch. Connor had given me the pull-out bed in the living room and stared at the ceiling fan, trying to make sense of it. Did he mean I looked different too? Did he mean something else entirely? I told myself not to overthink. He was just being polite, right? Friendly, nothing more. But then why had he looked at me like that? The next morning, I woke up to the smell of bacon and the sounds of Connor shouting something about eggs being a fragile ecosystem. I rolled off the couch, ran a hand through my hair, and stumbled into the kitchen. Ethan was already there, shirtless. He stood barefoot by the counter, pouring pancake batter into a pan like it was just another day. His back was to me, and I caught myself staring at the muscles along his shoulders, the way they shifted with every movement. His shorts sat low on his hips, a towel lazily thrown over one of them like he'd just come in from a swim. "Morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder like he knew exactly what he was doing. I grabbed a glass from the cabinet, mostly to give my hands something to do. "You always cook shirtless?" I asked, half joking. "Only when it's hot," he said, flipping a pancake effortlessly. "Which it is." Connor strolled in, still half asleep and rubbing his eyes. "Ethan makes the best pancakes, just don't ask what's in them." "Trade secret," Ethan said, shooting his brother a grin. We all sat around the little kitchen table, the three of us, laughing over half-burnt bacon and pancakes that were honestly amazing. It was easy, comfortable, the way you want lazy weekends to feel. But underneath it all, I could still feel that low thrum of energy whenever Ethan looked at me. Like there was something he wasn't saying. That afternoon, we all headed down to the lake. Some of the guys were already in the water, tossing a frisbee around and yelling nonsense. I took a slower route, finding a patch of shade near the edge of the dock, feet dangling over the water. A few minutes later, Ethan came up beside me. "You're not much of a swimmer?" he asked. I shrugged. "I like the water, just not the part where people scream and splash like toddlers." He laughed, sitting down beside me. Our shoulders brushed for a second before he shifted slightly. Not away, just enough to notice. "I always liked it out here," he said, looking out at the lake. "Quiet. Makes you think clearer." I nodded. "Yeah, something about open water, no cell signal. It's like everything else shuts off for a bit." Ethan was quiet for a while, and I wondered if I'd killed the conversation. Then he leaned back on his palms, the sun catching his skin in a way that made it hard to look away. "You were always cool to me, back in the day," he said suddenly. The comment caught me off guard. "I mean, you were Connor's friend," I replied, unsure where he was going with this. It wasn't like I had a reason not to be. "Yeah, but you didn't treat me like a kid," he said. "Everyone else did." I looked at him then, really looked. He wasn't that awkward teenager anymore. He wasn't hiding behind shaggy hair or hoodies. There was something steady in the way he spoke now. Confident, but still careful. "Well," I said, "you're definitely not a kid anymore." He didn't respond right away, but the corner of his mouth twitched like he was holding back a smile. "Glad you noticed," he murmured. Before I could think of a reply, someone shouted from the lake. "Ethan, get your ass in here." He stood up, brushing sand off his legs. "You coming?" he asked, looking down at me. I nodded slowly, heart doing something weird in my chest. "Yeah," I said. "I'll be right there." He walked off toward the dock, and for a moment, I just sat there, trying to wrap my head around the fact that Connor's little brother, Ethan, was flirting with me. Or at least, I was pretty sure he was. That evening, after hours in the sun, we were all sunburnt, full of grilled burgers, and too lazy to do much besides sit around and nurse beers. Someone put on a playlist, the kind of music you don't have to think about, summery, nostalgic, loud enough to fill the space, but quiet enough that conversation still slipped through. Connor eventually crashed early, claiming he was fried from head to soul. A few of the other guys followed, but Ethan and I stayed out on the porch. It was cooler now, the lake calm, the sky turning that deep kind of blue that only happens right before it goes black. He sat across from me, nursing a beer, legs stretched out, bare feet resting on the bottom rail of the porch. The only light was a dim string of bulbs over the eaves and the soft glow from his phone, which he glanced at every few minutes, then pocketed again. "You always this quiet?" I asked, echoing his words from the night before. Ethan looked up, the corners of his mouth twitching. "Only when I'm trying to figure someone out." "Oh?" I raised an eyebrow. "You got me all figured out yet?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a long sip from his bottle, his eyes never leaving mine. "Not even close," he said, voice low. "But I'm starting to get a better picture." There was a pause. Not awkward, but thick. Charged. "What are you trying to figure out exactly?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Why, you haven't asked me yet." I blinked. "Asked you what?" He shrugged, too casual. "If I'm straight. Or bi. Or whatever." I stared at him, caught off guard by his bluntness. "I mean," he continued, "I see the way you look at me. I'm not an idiot." That made my chest tighten. "Okay, then why bring it up?" "Because I wanted to see what you'd do," he said, his voice soft now, more serious. "Because I'm not trying to mess with you. And if I'm reading this wrong, I need to know before I cross a line." The silence that followed felt like a slow inhale of breath neither of us wanted to let out. "I wasn't gonna ask," I said eventually. "Figured it wasn't my business." "It is now," he replied. We locked eyes, and in that moment, everything that had been building over the last day, the tension, the looks, the subtle brushes of skin, suddenly felt real, like a storm had been hanging overhead, and I'd only just noticed the thunder. Ethan looked down at his bottle. "I'm not out. To anyone. Not even Connor." I swallowed. "You don't owe me that." He met my gaze again. "I know, but I wanted you to have it." I nodded, unsure what to say. Every version of this moment that had played out in my head over the last 24 hours didn't come close to the real thing. I hadn't expected the honesty. The weight of it. He leaned back again, exhaling slowly. "Anyway, if this is weird now, we can just forget it." "It's not weird," I said quietly. He looked over. "I mean it," I added. "It's not." His expression softened, and for the first time, the confidence dropped away. I saw a flicker of vulnerability, like he wasn't sure if he'd just opened a door or lit it on fire. We didn't say anything for a while after that. Just sat there, drinking in the quiet. The porch creaked as the breeze shifted. Somewhere inside, someone snored, but out here it was still. After a while, Ethan stood up. "I should crash," he said, stretching. "Big day of floating on a lake tomorrow," I smiled. "Exhausting, I'm sure." He took a few steps toward the door, then stopped. "Hey," he said, turning back to me. "Thanks for not making this weird." "Anytime," I said. He gave me one of those small, knowing nods, the kind you exchange when something important just passed between you. Then he went inside, leaving me alone on the porch, heart pounding and head full of 1,000 questions. I wasn't sure where this was going, but I knew one thing for sure. Something had shifted, and neither of us could pretend it hadn't. The next morning was quiet in that post-reveal kind of way. You know, when something real gets said and the world feels just slightly tilted afterward, like gravity still adjusting. Ethan was already up when I wandered into the kitchen, sipping coffee out of a chipped mug, staring out the window like he was lost in thought. He didn't look over when I walked in, just nodded toward the pot like we were two coworkers on a slow Monday. "You sleep all right?" I asked, grabbing a mug for myself. He shrugged. Took a while, too much noise in my head. "Yeah," I said, "I get that." The conversation didn't go any deeper than that. And honestly, it didn't need to. There was something kind of comforting in the normalcy of it. Like we'd both silently agreed not to force anything. Not yet. The rest of the group slowly filtered in, hungover and sunburnt, flopping into chairs and groaning at the bright light. Connor made another round of questionable scrambled eggs, and someone found an old speaker to put on a playlist that felt aggressively cheery for how sluggish everyone looked. Ethan and I didn't really talk through breakfast, but I caught him glancing at me a few times, just quick flickers. And once, when our knees bumped under the table, he didn't pull away. The day passed in a blur of lazy lake stuff, paddleboards, beers on the dock, a half-hearted attempt at volleyball that turned into everyone just falling over laughing. It was fun. Easy, but every so often, I'd find myself looking for Ethan. And more than once, I'd catch him already looking at me, Later that afternoon, while most of the guys passed out in hammocks or dozed in the shade, I grabbed a towel and headed down the trail toward the edge of the property. There was a small rock outcrop overlooking the lake, quiet, half hidden, a place I'd used to escape the noise on previous trips. Ethan showed up 5 minutes later. He didn't say anything, just dropped his towel next to mine and sat down. "You always find the quiet spots," he said, staring out at the water. "Only way I survive weekends like this." He chuckled softly. "Same." There was a long pause. "The good kind. The kind that makes the space between two people feel smaller, not larger." "You ever feel like you're waiting for something?" he said, "but you don't know what it is?" I turned to look at him. He wasn't smiling. He looked tired. Or maybe just raw. "All the time," I said. He nodded. Like, that made sense. "I think that's why I came on this trip," he admitted. "Not just to hang out. I think I needed to know if I could be real with someone." I swallowed. "You picked the right person." He looked at me then, and there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not just curiosity or attraction. Trust. "You make it easy," he said. That hit me harder than I expected. We didn't touch. We didn't move closer. But something shifted again, like the space between us had quietly collapsed, just a little more. "I'm not trying to make this a thing," he said quickly, like he was afraid of where his own words were going. I've never told anyone. Not really. And with you, it feels easier." I nodded. "That's enough. You don't owe me anything else." He looked relieved, like he'd been bracing for some other response. Then he smiled, a real one this time, and nudged my shoulder with his. "You always this cool?" he asked. "No," I said. "Only when it matters." We stayed up on the rocks for another hour, just talking. About random stuff, nothing heavy. But it was different now. Everything was different now. And that night? That night is when everything tipped. But I'll get to that. The sky was already ink black by the time we got back to the house. Most of the guys were either in their rooms or passed out on the couch in various stages of beer-induced unconsciousness. The air inside was warm and humid, the fans doing their best but mostly just moving the heat around. Connor had disappeared hours ago with his girlfriend on FaceTime. No one was looking for us. No one noticed we'd been gone. Ethan trailed behind me up the stairs, both of us barefoot and quiet. Neither of us said it out loud, but we both knew we weren't going to our own rooms just yet. When I stepped into the bunk room, the door barely clicked shut before Ethan followed me in. "I don't think I'm gonna sleep," he said, leaning against the dresser. "Me neither," I said, and it felt like an answer to more than just the question. He crossed the room in 3 slow steps and sat on the edge of the lower bunk across from mine. The only light came from the sliver of moon leaking through the blinds, just enough to sketch out the shape of him. Bare shoulders, the curve of his throat, legs spread slightly apart like he didn't even realize how casual and confident he looked sitting there. "Can I ask you something?" he said, after a moment. "Sure." "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Being open, about who you are." I leaned back against the wall, folding my arms over my chest. "Not really. I mean, it hasn't always been easy. Some people bailed, but I'd rather deal with that than pretend, you know?" Ethan nodded, slowly. I don't think I ever realized how much I was pretending. He looked at me again, eyes catching the moonlight. "Being here with you, it's the first time I felt like I didn't have to." Something tightened in my chest, something warm and unsteady. "I'm glad," I said. "You deserve that." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full of something we couldn't quite name yet. The kind that makes you hyper-aware of every breath, every heartbeat, every inch of space between two people. Ethan shifted slightly, his eyes dropping to the floor. "If I do something stupid," he said, "you'll tell me, right?" I barely had time to answer before he stood and took a step forward. Then another. Then he was right in front of me, close enough that I could smell the lake still clinging to his skin, the faint citrus from his shampoo. He didn't touch me. Not yet. Just looked at me, waiting. I nodded, slow. Yeah, I'll tell you. He leaned in. Not fast, not hesitant either, just sure. And when our lips finally met, it didn't feel like a first kiss. It felt like something that had been waiting for permission for a long time. It was soft, careful. Like he was afraid he'd mess it up if he moved too fast. His hand brushed my jaw, tentative but deliberate, like he was learning me one touch at a time. I kissed him back. No performance, no question, just honesty. And in that moment, everything quieted. The noise in my head, the weight I didn't know I'd been carrying, the questions hanging between us, all of it melted into that single point of contact. When we finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine and exhaled like he'd been holding his breath all day. That wasn't stupid, I whispered. He laughed, barely. Good, because I really wanted to do it. We stood there like that for a while, close, but not rushed. Nothing about it felt urgent or wild. It felt right. Like something we'd stumbled into but somehow already understood. Eventually, he stepped back and sat again, quieter now. I don't know what this is, he said softly. I just know I want more of it, I nodded, heart thudding. We'll figure it out, and we would. But in that moment, we didn't need answers, just each other. I expected it to feel different the next morning. Worse, maybe? Complicated. Like we'd crossed some invisible line, and now everything would be tense and full of glances we couldn't hold. But it wasn't. When I woke up, Ethan was still there, curled up in the bunk across from mine, one arm slung under his pillow, his mouth slightly open like he was mid-dream. There was something weirdly grounding about it, like the world hadn't fallen apart just because two guys kissed in a lake house. He stirred a few minutes later, stretching with a soft groan before blinking over at me. You always wake up this early? He mumbled, voice rough from sleep. Only when I've got something on my mind, I said. He sat up, rubbing his face. Yeah, same. We didn't talk about the kiss. Not right away. Instead, we moved through the morning like we always had, made coffee, stole the last of the cereal before Connor got up, laughed quietly about someone's half-naked sleepwalking the night before. But something was different, even if no one else noticed. It was in the way Ethan stood a little closer, or how our eyes lingered for an extra second when we passed each other in the kitchen. It was subtle, but it was there. Eventually, we found ourselves alone on the porch again. Everyone else had gone to town to grab supplies and snacks, leaving us in that familiar kind of silence that had become something of a rhythm between us. Ethan leaned on the railing, sipping from a cold bottle of water, staring out at the lake like it had answers we didn't. So, he said after a while. I looked over. So, that wasn't just a heat-of-the-moment thing for you, right? He asked. I shook my head. No, it wasn't. He exhaled like he'd been holding that question all morning. Me either, he said, which is kind of terrifying, honestly. Yeah, I agreed, but in a good way. He turned to face me, elbows still on the railing, his expression unreadable. What do we do now? He asked. It was a simple question, but it landed heavy. I don't know, I said honestly, but we don't have to figure it all out right now. He nodded, slowly. You're good at that. At what? Being calm when I feel like my brain is running full speed into a wall? I smiled. Comes from experience. He laughed, and for a second, the tension lifted. I keep thinking about what happens when this weekend ends, he admitted, when we're back in the real world. What if this doesn't work outside of here? It might not, I said, or it might. Either way, I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen, and I'm not gonna ghost you." Ethan looked at me for a long moment, then nodded again. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay." He moved closer, not much, just enough that our arms brushed. That tiny, electric contact was all it took to say what neither of us could quite put into words yet. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, he found his way back to my room. We didn't kiss this time. We didn't need to. He just crawled into the bunk beside me, the mattress creaking under his weight, and lay there in the dark with our fingers barely touching under the blanket. And that was enough. For now. The last morning at the lake house felt different. Everyone was dragging their feet, half hungover and half sad that the weekend was ending. Even Connor, who usually bounced around like an over-caffeinated camp counselor, was unusually quiet as he folded beach towels and shoved empty beer cans into garbage bags. I packed slowly, not really because I needed to, but because I didn't know how to leave whatever this was behind. Ethan and I hadn't defined anything. We hadn't had some dramatic confession or a whispered promise under the stars, but something had settled between us, something that didn't feel temporary. As we loaded the cars, he brushed by me once, close enough for our arms to touch. Neither of us said anything about it. We didn't have to. The drive back to the city was quiet. Connor was in my car, blasting an old playlist we used to jam to in high school, and talking about the girl he'd been texting all weekend. I nodded along, responded where I needed to, but my head was somewhere else, thinking about Ethan. What he was thinking. If he was freaking out. If he felt the same mix of fear and something close to hope curling in my chest. By the time I got home, I had half convinced myself it was over, that maybe the lake house was a bubble, and whatever had happened there would dissolve the second real life settled back in. Then my phone buzzed. "Ethan, you home yet?" I stared at it for a moment, then typed back. "Me, just got in." A minute later, another ping. "Ethan, can I come over?" I didn't overthink it. I just replied. "Me. Yeah." Doors unlocked. When he walked in, he looked the same. Backpack slung over one shoulder, hoodie half zipped, that same uncertain set to his jaw. But there was something in his eyes that steadied me. He dropped his stuff by the door, took a breath, then looked at me across the room. "I don't want to go back to pretending," he said. "Then don't," I replied. He crossed the room slowly, like he was making sure I wouldn't disappear. And when he finally reached me, he didn't say anything. He just stepped close and wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into a hug that said everything he hadn't. Not a kiss, not a move, just a quiet, tight, honest hug, like he needed to feel that I was still real. "I don't know what I'm doing," he murmured against my shoulder. "Same," I said. He pulled back, just enough to look me in the eye. "But I want to try." That was it. The beginning. No grand declarations, no fireworks, just two guys, trying. Carefully. Honestly. Together.